Robert F. Trager is the founding director of the Oxford Martin AI Governance Initiative at the University of Oxford and senior research fellow at the Blavatnik School of Government. A leading expert on the international governance of emerging technologies, he advises government and industry leaders. His award-winning research, including books and articles, has been widely covered in major outlets. Previously, he was a professor at UCLA, taught at Yale, and held an Olin Fellowship at Harvard. To you, Robert Trager.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Glad to be here, and I think I'm going to focus basically on two things today, which are hopefully described a little bit in the title. The first is how we, as many of us here are academics, what role do we have to play in a broader ecosystem to develop a set of standards and to promulgate a set of standards and to figure out how there are incentives for standards adoption, including at the international level. So that's what I'm going to focus on now. Why do we have to do that? Well, I think we sort of heard this morning already some of the very pressing reasons why we need to do some of these things. That is why we need to govern this technology. But I think there are many more reasons, in fact, than we have talked about already. Thinking about how these technologies will be good for the broadest set of people around the world is one of them. But I'm not going to go into the why, because we've already covered that today. So I'm going to turn immediately to just saying these are the two things that I'm going to cover, because it comforts me to think of us as having to do just these two things we have to do. And the first here is developing international standards for advanced AI. And the second, if it will come, there it is setting incentives for the adoption of those standards at the international level. All right, so I'm going to talk first about the first and second about the second. So first of all, why do we, as a group of people who are thinking about this and a group of academics, need to develop global standards for advanced AI practice? Well, there's a lot of work going on in this space. There's a lot of excellent work going on in this space. But I don't think any of the groups that are doing that excellent work are quite getting, or certainly not certain to get, to what you might call a gold standard for advanced AI practice around the world. And when I say advanced AI practice, I mean the frontier safety frameworks, I mean risk management frameworks, I mean liability frameworks for governments, the broad set of things that we need to do to govern this technology, for which we don't have a great name. That's why I called it advanced AI practice, because actually there's so many different things, like risk management framework refers to NIST, what NIST is doing, and frontier safety frameworks refer to voluntary commitments of companies. So we don't have a good name for it. If anybody has a better name, please let me know. But I mean the broad set of things that we need to do. Okay, so nobody is quite getting to a gold standard. Why is that no one is getting to gold standard? Well, what are firms doing? They're doing lots of excellent work, but of course they have a profit motive which distorts a bit the work. They're also publishing some of what they're doing, but not everything that they're doing. It's not building like a science. And even when it is building a little bit, when insights from one place can build on what's done somewhere else, that could stop. There could be a decision for corporate reasons not to do that anymore. And we have seen cases where firms aren't sharing everything that they know about safety or how to implement an ethical system, because it can be a competitive advantage. So I don't think we can fully rely on firms to do what needs to be done. And governments and international organizations similarly are doing great work. Safety institutes are doing great work, but they're also beset by issues that mean that it's difficult for them to do everything that we need to do. So it's hard at a safety institute, I think, to do a project whose endpoint in terms of impact on policy is more than a year off. Well, we know, those of us who are academics, that we've had often the luxury of taking much more time to do things like writing a book. And we know that there's a lot that you can't do in a given year. Now, many of us have short timelines for the advancement of the technology. That's not to say that we don't need to be doing a lot in the year, but maybe we are going to need some so-called moonshot projects that take a little bit longer than a year. Well, where can those sorts of projects happen? And who has the expertise? Civil society, again, doing excellent work, but lacking, in many cases, different sorts of expertise, particularly technical expertise. And a lot of that exists in academia, actually. So as an academic myself, I often think of my colleagues as sort of a set of cats that would be very difficult to herd and get going in a direction. So it's a surprise to me, in a way, to say, I think that there really is an essential role for academics to play here. But in order to play that role, we're going to need to organize. We're going to need to coordinate, and we're going to need to set research agendas and have conferences like this one. So thank goodness we're all here at this conference. So that's one of the things that we've been doing. We published, when I say we, I mean the initiative that I lead at the University of Oxford, called the AI Governance Initiative at the Oxford Martin School. We're working on a series of agendas. One of them has been published by the lead authors, Anka Royal and Ben Bucknell, who at least one of them is here at the conference, along with, I think, almost 40 other authors, which tries to set an agenda. A lot of times technical people come to me and they say, what should I be working on? I'm really worried about governance. What should I be doing? So this is, in part, an attempt to start to answer those questions. And now we're working on two other agendas that I invite you all to help us with. One of those is the one I'm going to focus on, an agenda for gold standard advanced AI practices. So that's this broad set of governance measures that I was talking about. I think, maybe just to sort of reiterate a little bit of point that I've been trying to make, if you hopefully can see the words on the slide here, the developers of frontier AI systems have so much expertise. Governments have a set of expertise. Academia has a set of expertise. Civil society has a set of expertise. Regulators, downstream application providers have another set of expertise. So we need to be interdisciplinary in a really extreme sense. And I think we probably need to be iterating quite a lot. We need to have something that comes from a collaboration in one part of the space that's then taken by another part of the space and causes a reaction. And we need to sort of have a churn there to leverage the broad expertise. And that really is a challenge because, as we all know from disciplinary silos, that's not always the way that it works. But we have an extreme challenge at the moment, so that is something that we need to rise to. Okay, so what we have done in this paper, or are doing, I should say, in this paper, is to try to develop a taxonomy for all the standards that we need for an advanced AI practice framework. And so we've divided up into four things: the foundations, which are things like the definition of advanced AI, testing, which is things like evals and red teaming, risk management, which includes risk identification, risk analysis, and then broader forms of governance, which include things like accountability measures that governments might adopt. Now, we divided it into these four categories, but there are many more subcategories than I could put onto this slide. So these are examples. But our ambition here is to be comprehensive and to identify what the frontier of knowledge is, so what's already been done, and to identify what the questions are, what are key questions that particularly regulators are asking now or may ask in the future, that we can invest scientifically in order to use the best science to answer. So for instance, what we're trying to do here, and I'm sort of telling you about this in the hope that some of you will help us to do this, or do this among yourselves and tell us what you did, or whatever it is. So an example is model evaluations. So within the testing category, we had model evaluations, and then we have a set of subcategories within that, and then under each of those we have questions, and then we have a set of example projects. And the higher up on the list you go, the more comprehensive we can be. We can't be obviously fully comprehensive about the projects, but we're trying to get some out there that folks could work on and would be actionable. So we identify the set of research, we say what folks are doing. We talk, for instance, about the excellent paper on the transparency in company evaluations and the lack thereof. And then we move a little further down the list, and we can ask an example question and an example project and try to identify the actors that we think this is most relevant to. So, for instance, we have a subcategory of developing evaluations, and within the subcategory of developing evaluations, we have the example question, how can robust testing be assured through an independent selection process for benchmarks for a given model? And then within that, we have an example project, create a framework for selecting authoritative benchmarks based on model features and capabilities. Or to give you one more example, we have the subcategory of interpreting evaluations, and we have the example question, how can details of evaluations be documented before being run? And the example project, creating a technical platform for tamper-proof audit trails of pre-registrations of model evaluations. So it might be useful to pre-register a model, just like we pre-register an evaluation in the way that we pre-register an experiment. That might be a really useful project for folks to work on. Okay, so that's something where I think I really like to see people coordinating. Anybody who would like to coordinate on those things, please reach out to us. And now I want to move to thinking about how we go from standards, if we are able to develop a gold standard, to a global set of incentives for adopting those standards. We saw recently, for instance, with DeepSeek, that these really are global challenges. So how do we get to a global set of standards? And my last few minutes here, I just want to sketch some ways that can happen, because I think people often talk about really grand visions and then get discouraged when there's pushback against those grand visions. So I want to suggest some ways that getting to global standards are sort of seem quite actionable. Not that they're immediately going to happen, just that they're the sort of things that we've done in the past. So one thing, if you look at other regimes like ICAO, that is the International Civil Aviation Organization, or the Financial Action Task Force, or the International Maritime Organization, or indeed other international regimes that govern other technologies, one of the things you see often is a kind of balance between what happens domestically and what happens internationally. And so, for instance, there are authorities that sit one place and that sit in the other. So if you think about the example of the International Civil Aviation Organization, it's not actually auditing any companies. It doesn't look at Air France or British Airways and see if it's doing the right thing. It's looking at jurisdictions to see if they have the appropriate regulations and in some cases to see if they're actually enforcing those regulations. And So it will tell the world if that's not the case. And when it informs the world that that's not the case, states can react to set incentives. So for instance, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States, has the ability to prohibit access to its airspace to any state that's violating ICAO rules. So some things happen at the international level, and some things in terms of incentives are happening at the domestic level. But those things work together and have worked together to give us very high safety provision in the aviation space. Now, I'm not saying that this is a 100% perfect analogy, but there are a lot of things that we can do, that we have done before, that could do a lot of good, if not solve all the problems. All right, I think I'll move on just a little and finish up here. And I want to suggest just giving you some ideas, because of course we could talk about this all day. But I think when we're thinking about how could we have a global regime that is practical and we can really animate it and cooperate in ways like we cooperate on money laundering and in other spaces, we might think of the particular role that compute providers play, because they can be potentially regulatory intermediaries in the way that finance companies are regulatory intermediaries. We all have the experience of being denied access to financial resources like our credit card because we raised some red flag. And it could be similar with computing resources. If a developer raises a red flag, maybe they're denied computing resources until that red flag is cleared. So we can think about the ways that you create a global architecture as we have done in the past. So just to conclude, I think that first of all, we have hope in terms of the ways that we may be able to create an international architecture. But in order to do that, we really need a gold standard set of standards for how to govern this technology. And that is something that really, I think we as academics, many of us as academics, have a really important role to play. And if anybody wants to collaborate on that, I think I said this now 3 or 4 times, you know I mean it, please do get in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. You can actually stay up and we'll do a few minutes of Q&A.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I have a question about the incentives. You talked a lot about kind of ways we can align incentives, but I'm wondering about strength of incentives. You used the aviation industry as an example. I think incentives are pretty aligned there, but I think AI is a bit more like climate change, where incentives are really, really powerfully against, even cooperating with accords that we have signed. So I wonder how you think about that playing out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think that's right. You know, it's different. There are some incentives for violating what might be an international regime, but I think fundamentally states could decide to deny access to their markets, for instance, to states that are violating an international set of standards. They could decide to deny access to the inputs into AI production functions to states that are violating, as they're already showing themselves very willing to deny access to AI inputs. So there are things that they could decide to do, but it's definitely true that it would require significant political will to do it. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll go in the back, and then I saw one here.
Hi, thanks very much. I know we're not necessarily doing names, but I'm going to give mine because it's relevant. So I'm Sarah, and I'm from IASEAI, which is a large social justice NGO. And my question really relates to the space in the framework that you've laid out for us for NGOs, civil society, people who maybe have on-the-ground direct experience of some of the harms that are happening through AI, to kind of be in your process, because in that beautiful diagram you had, I didn't see any room for input for on-the-ground harms. And as Anka so beautifully said this morning, on-the-ground harms are not in competition with the frameworks we're trying to set up. They should be part and parcel of it. I'm going to give a slight plug. Those purple and pink books back there, they're from IASEAI. They contain 5 stories of real-life harms from the actual people who experience them. But obviously, that's just a single instance. How would you, in the framework that you're setting up, incorporate the experience, the knowledge, the research, the vast resource you would have from civil society to inform your framework?
I couldn't agree more, and I hope you'll help us to do exactly that. That's, I think, the first answer. I mean, what you're saying is exactly right. We need to be doing post-deployment monitoring. We need to be checking the impact of these technologies on societies, which currently we're not doing that much of. I mean, if I want to run a survey experiment on a human population at a university, I need to go through the institutional review board in order to do that, which weighs the benefits of potential research against potential costs, and frankly can be a bit of a pain in the neck to pass through those review boards sometimes, even when the potential harms are negligible. But when it comes to implementing AI technologies on human populations, we're doing very little. We're just experimenting, and we're barely testing even after the fact to see what has happened. So I think this is a huge area, and I hope will be a very significant part of the agenda that we're setting up, and please help us to improve it.
Hi. Hi, I'm Denisa. I'd like to ask something about a global AI system. Here. Something that is, the agreement that is more acceptable for now is the United Nations Human Rights Agreement, accepted from all nations. Do you believe that a system, a global system based on this agreement could be something to control the AI in the future? And how are going the states deliver their sovereignty to that? And if doesn't that happen, how the AI will be controlled otherwise?
Yeah, so I didn't talk that much about overall control of AI or even arms control of militaries. I think those are essential topics. We could literally talk all day and many other days about just those topics. I think states have different approaches when it comes to the UN. Some like the idea of things going through the UN, others less so. But there's also something fundamental here. I mean, if you're talking about a small, very small group of states that are really at the cutting edge, and then a larger group of states that are not, if in a UN context some things happen by one state, one vote, well, there's an asymmetry of interest there. It would be strange if some of those states were willing to give up the influence, the dramatic influence that they have right now fully in a UN context. Now, I think I think a lot of things can happen at the UN. I think all sorts of capacity building, for instance, in a broad set of states is very important, can happen at the UN. And I think some governance measures also can happen at the UN. But I don't think that the UN should be the only forum. I think we need to be discussing a range of different fora for those discussions.
Thank you. We're going to move on with our program. Thank you so much, Robert Trager.